Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our moderator for this session, President of the SOAS University of London, Zeynep Bedawi, and the emerging leaders.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Please, my young emerging leaders, sit down, please. Aren't they all wonderful? Yes, so you had a glimpse. I'm Zeynep Bedawi. It's lovely to be with all of you, and it's my great pleasure to be moderating the final plenary session of this year's Atlantic Dialogues. You saw there on screen the images of the young emerging leaders, and they were participating in a workshop which is called Build, Connect, Anticipate, and that's what they've been doing throughout these 3 days of the conference. They've been discussing where they feel they are, where the world is, and where they want it to go. And we've had 11 years of the emerging leaders. They're called the Atlantic Dialogue Emerging Leaders, so it's ADEL for short. And they've also been meeting with cohorts from previous years. And the idea is that they try and identify what gaps they feel there are in the discussions that have been held. So we're going to create what the Oxford English Dictionary calls a youth quake. And that means when the youth speak up and create a lot of turbulence for all of you. So we're hoping we're going to be hearing some turbulent views from them. I'm going to go through each of them, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. So, Nusrat, you kick off.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. My name is Nusrat Farooq. I'm from India. I'm an engineer turned investigative researcher. I work as Technology and Programs Associate at Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism, and that's based in Washington, D.C.
Levar.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Levar Thomas. I'm from the U.S., Brooklyn, New York specifically. I serve as an environmental justice coordinator with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as well as running a nonprofit organization called Leaders of the Free World, which provides international experience and leadership development to young black men nationally in the U.S. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all.
Great. Cecilia.
Thank you. I am Cecilia Vidottola Basti. I am Italian and French, and I work as a researcher for the Institut Montaigne think tank based in Paris. Thank you.
And Amin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amin Derj. I am a French and Moroccan citizen. I'm an engineer, entrepreneur, consultant, and also a beekeeper.
Okay, good. As they say in life, I mean, you attract more flies with honey than you do vinegar. So very good, you're on the right track.
And I'm here to
Pauline.
Hi, everybody. What an honor to be here. I was born and raised in Brazil, but I've been living in the United States for the past 12 years. I work at the United Nations Secretariat. I work in the Global Communication Division. I'm also finishing a PhD in educational leadership with the University of Connecticut, and I, too, am a UNESCO youth representative. And again, thank you for having me.
Great. So, you know everybody, they really are a very impressive bunch of young people because every year 30 young emerging leaders are chosen, and they are chosen from 1,600 applicants from more than 100 countries. And then we whittle them down to 30, and there are 30 in total here at the Atlantic Dialogues, and then we have these 5 representatives, and this year we have 30 from 22 countries. So you see we've got a really very wide variety of views from the Atlantic region that we are discussing. So let me start off, let me go to you first, Cecilia. So just very quickly outline for us what you all feel are the objectives, the aims of the Emerging Leaders Network.
I think that the main goal is to create intergenerational empathy. We've been discussing it over the last week. But something that I would like to point out, without being too provocative, is that as much as we really appreciate to be here and to have the opportunity to speak out and to discuss, this panel, in a way, also feels like a quota. So I mean, we will discuss it further, but I would like to see more young people being represented in all the different panels to every time have like their intake. And also we have like really precise expertise that we would like to share. And I think it would be interesting to see it in the future.
Very interesting. So do you feel that you're sort of slightly ghettoized, as it were, by being given this satellite? Do you all agree with what Cecilia said? Yeah.
I agree with her, and I do want to bring attention to how balanced this panel is, and this is the first ever balanced panel you might have seen in the Atlantic Dialogues 2022. We, as you pointed out, are selected from 115 countries. We have 30 leaders now. 30 of us are from 22 countries itself, but it's not limited to that. This panel represents 5 different continents, except Australia and Antarctica. Not only that, this panel also represents almost all races: Black, brown, Latinx, Arab, white, as well as indigenous and ethnic people, religious as well as non-religious. In terms of professional practice, you heard all of us are from a very diverse expertise.
Sure.
But
do you feel that you are a little bit dislocated from the discussions? Do you all agree with what Cecilia said, that you should be more integrated into the panels? Pauline?
Absolutely. And, you know, if we were to really design the schedule of the conference, I would much rather prefer a panel in which we have more emerging leaders talking in between, you know, the high-level discussions, because we certainly have a lot to say. And I sense that this is the right space to start that kind of collaboration. So I am very much in agreement with my colleagues.
All right. Put up your hands if you agree that there should be a youth person on every panel.
There you
Put
go.
up, yeah, well. Hey, that's not bad. 5 minutes in, you've already winning the arguments.
Yes.
Okay, so organisers of next year's Atlantic Dialogues, pay attention. All right, I know it's not representative of all youth all over the country, but there was a very landmark, it's done every year, landmark African Youth Survey. And this year, it said that African youth, their 3 priorities, broadly speaking, come under 3 areas: governance, job creation, and climate. So would you agree that in your discussions, broadly speaking, these are your 3 priorities? You would. Okay, so let's kick off with the first one, governance. Let me come to you, LeVar, because I know you've got a very interesting initiative which involves young Black American men. So on the governance issue, kick off on that.
Sure. I think, particularly in the United States, there is a resource disparity gap when it comes to Black Americans and minorities within the country at large. And I think when it comes to governance, ensuring that we have opportunities that are inclusive, that we are ensuring that the experiences and the obstacles as well that are in place are being addressed from a policy standpoint, and that we are factoring in the different challenges that exist. Growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I can say from my experience, when it comes to education in minority communities, the quality is a bit less compared to other communities that, that have more economic or financial resources. But that's not only limited to the United States, that even transcends global boundaries as well. So it's, from a governance standpoint, it's ensuring that voices that are disproportionately underrepresented are in the political decision-making process, and that's a lot of the work that I try to do with my students.
Right. Pauline, from Brazil, I know that as part of your workshop, you were addressed by Obi Ezekwesili, who's got this amazing initiative in her native Nigeria, which is to try to really get young people into politics, essentially, to help them, step up to the plate and run for office and so on. Is that the way, do you think, when we're talking about governance, that you want more young people running for office?
Absolutely. So yesterday, the first session here, we had La Excelentísima Ministra Laura Albornoz. She gave me a term that stuck with me, which is, in Spanish, she said that nowadays, politics, there's this sort of analfabetismo emocional, meaning emotional illiteracy that sort of goes on in politics. So it comes to youth and dealing with youth and pushing forth, youth-related agenda, just in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. I feel like we really do need to pass the mic, right? And we need to really focus on empowering initiatives that will ensure that youth is at the center. So to me, I agree more than 100%.
But are there, I mean, I'm just puzzled, we talk about bringing youth to the table.
Yes.
So just imagine you have got youth at the top table, be it in government, be it in some kind of, NGOs or policy-making institutions and so on. What concerns would you bring to the table?
For example, I'm just going to give you the data. So 1.2 billion people in the world are part of youth. They're ages between 15 and 24. Technically, we're not youth anymore, but we work very closely with a lot of them. And when you look at that, age and stage, 15 to 24, it's 3 times more unlikely that those folks will be unemployed. That's just data that I'm giving to you according to the United Nations. Not because I work there, but because it's a reliable source. So you think about that. So I think that obviously they need employment, right, to contribute to society and to join and to help us get where we want to go as a society. But in order to get to jobs and sustainability and those broader goals, I feel like we need to really provide youth with education, particularly across countries in the global south and the Atlantic, because we are at a huge disadvantage. And historically speaking, we have been denied education that gets us to where we need to go in terms of employment and human rights and all of that. But that sounds really, really big. I guess that my dream for someone who's working with youth, just to wrap up, is I would like for youth to have access to meaningful education and meaningful training that really provides us with opportunities to, seek the jobs that we want and to really contribute to society in the best possible way.
All right. So, panel, do you broadly agree with what Pauline says, that the more young people are represented at top tables, the more likely you're to get a response to the particular concerns you have? You think there's a direct cause and effect? Absolutely. You do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have more youth at the table, it adds diversity to the conversation. I think in terms of challenges, there tend to be a generational, I would say, divide when it comes to how we approach issues. Earlier in the week, I think there was someone who had mentioned that they don't believe that youth today are addressing issues any differently from their previous generations in the past. And I strongly disagree with that, because I think in the age of technology and media, we have new platforms and nuanced ways of addressing issues and speaking to issues compared to the previous generation, and not necessarily folding our arms when we see issues and remaining silent, but speaking out against injustices, whether it's domestically or nationally.
So you don't think there's any reticence? Because we do see evidence of that. You get ministers and they get to the top table, but then they're surrounded by people of a much older generation, and they kind of just go native, and they're not pushing against the boundaries anymore, and they just really become part of that very system that they were criticizing in the first place. It takes a lot of courage, doesn't it, to hang on to your principles? Yeah.
If I could add on that. Having the youth represented at the table is not the end in itself. What's really important is this intergenerational dialogue, where we both gather wisdom, energy, and having the right things to be done. Currently, we are basically closer to the field in order to execute policies, to lead innovations, to solve problems, to hear the crowd, and also to understand the technology and how fast it evolves. We might not say that like in 10 years or 15 years when we won't be able to understand how fast things grow, but still, gathering our forces is key. Not only speaking and gathering data from the youth, but also setting plans together and executing it, because in full humility, we believe that youth are the execution power of your policies, of the strategical thinking that you guys have learned throughout the years of experience. So we need you to share that with us so that we can execute fast, because we do feel the emergency. and we need to execute fast.
Okay, great, thank you. Cecilia, comment on governance, and then we'll move on to the other categories, and you as well, Nusrat, if you want something. Yep.
If I may add something. I mean, we don't need youth just for the sake of having it. We need more inclusion in governance on a structural level. We need more women around the table. We need more people around the table and more diverse people around the table. And yesterday night we were on another panel discussing how do we have more women in peacemaking. Well, we discussed that if you have, the people that are negotiating peace treaties are the same ones that have been negotiating the ceasefire agreement. So it's easy. If you have no women negotiating the ceasefire agreements, there will be none in the peace negotiation. So it starts from a structural approach, having more women everywhere, but and not just women. I mean, I'm talking on a really intersectional level. We need more inclusion and more diversity.
All right, Nusrat, just on this governance issue, do you want to add a comment to your colleagues?
Yeah, I think I would suggest we change our frame of reference. I noticed in the last 3 days comments from panelists seeing youth as youth make chaos, they protest. Two gentlemen on day 2 of the democracy panel built the narrative that streets are angry. Who is on the streets? It's us. So youth are angry, but why are youth angry? We need to ask that question. We are rational actors, but why are we angry? So I want to change the frame of reference. We are not emerging young leaders. We are leaders who are young, but we are discriminated. But we are discriminated for our age. So I want to change the frame of reference here. My friend Theodora, we were talking yesterday after a dinner, she put it really nicely. She said, leadership is not a noun, it's a verb. So if you look at the examples that we have right now of leaders who are in position, I don't want to name them, you know them. So you know how they act, how they behave. Are they leaders in reality? Leadership really means to be a part of the change, to care about people. So we are all leaders right now. We are doing that, but we are discriminated for our age. So I want to change that frame of reference.
All right, good. I always think that, you know, when Nelson Mandela, you've always got to quote Nelson Mandela somewhere, haven't you? But, you know, when he started the ANC Youth League with, you know, Walter Sisulu and the others, they brought about change, but they were very young. We tend to think of him as a very old man, don't we? But actually, when he started all this and trying to dismantle apartheid, it was the Youth League that was the engine. So let me just see, can you put up your hands if you're members of the youth cohort here? Yeah? Oh, there's a big preponderance of you there. So microphone, does anybody want to add on this governance issue of getting more young people to positions of leadership? Anybody want to add a comment to what you've heard your colleagues say? Are you from the Young Leaders Network? Yep. Introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, it's not young, it's emerging.
Emerging leaders.
Yeah,
well, I tell you what,
actually,
you're young from my perspective, so
yeah,
please.
Yeah. I think this is already explained something, because we are all people that maybe have already more than 10 years of professional experience, so we are not, I really don't consider myself young anymore, because I work with the youth in high school. And what I wanted to add is that if you can really go back even to high school, and the sort of amazing ideas the real young people have is amazingly surprising. Like they are also very conscious of the kind of world we live in today, really globalized, really united thanks to social media. So I will actually go back to them and start from them, from schools, asking them what the kind of future they want, because they have such amazing range of ideas that we could implement that are never listened to. So let's go actually to the real youth.
Sure. Just hand the microphone to the lady behind you. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Deborah Braid. I'm from Nigeria. And I'm really proud of these people up there. I just want to add a comment around the cost and the barrier of entry into politics for youth. as someone from Africa, there are a lot of youth doing great work on the ground, but ultimately there's only so far social enterprise and groundwork can go to like national transformation. Good governance, enabling ecosystems, strong institutions are essential, and a lot of youth get burnt irreparably when they want to get into politics. So we need the existing systems of politics and political parties that charge as high as millions for a ticket to run for office to be remodeled by the older generation. And I think youth should not be seen as a threat to the older generation, but rather as an opportunity to bridge, like my friend there said, the wisdom of the old with new innovations. We're not a threat to old power or jobs, but we're a bridge between the different generations, and there needs to be more alliance across the generations.
All right, another young leader there. Oh gosh, and there's one there, and there's one there. Yep, go on.
Nayeli,
Emerging leader, sorry.
Sorry, also emerging leader, Nayeli Garza from Mexico. And I asked it on the last panel, but it was not answered. But honestly, there's a need, not just, that people here start thinking about how to develop talent inside of governance. Because we know that the problems where we're not worrying about the human capital. Private sector is doing it correctly. They worry about them. They help them to build a career plan inside of governance. So that's why it's inspiring, and that's a way that they can retain talent. So we need to also attract new talent for governance and also retain the talent.
Right, very important. Recruit, retain, and promote. Very quick comments. One more behind there, and then there's one there. Yeah. Another emerging leader? I only want emerging leaders at the moment.
Yes, of course. My name's Christina Cowett, and I'm from Canada. I'll comment on an opportunity and a success story in Canada. I just learned 2 weeks ago, actually, that in the Canadian Senate, which is our upper house, you're able to apply at the age of 35. And I see this as an opportunity because, of course, we can maybe have some representation in policy making at the highest level, but also a challenge since there's no one at that age currently sitting in the Canadian Senate. I met a senator 2 weeks ago, and she's 55 and feels out of place on the younger end of things. So just comment on that. Seems like perhaps the dial is shifting, but we need to continue these conversations to keep pressure on it.
All right, thank you. Is there a microphone at that very end? You've got to run fast, I'm afraid. There isn't a mic at that end. Oh, there is one there. Excellent. Please.
Hi, my name is Theodora Skiatis, and I'm from the United States as well. I appreciate that we're focusing so much of the discussion on the importance of including youth in these conversations. But I wanted to add that a lot of these people also spent a lot of time preparing thoughtful remarks on the individual expertises that they have. And so if we could, it would also be nice to make room in the conversation to hear their individual opinions and contributions in their areas of expertise.
Thank you.
If the time allows.
Well, we've got an hour, so I'm sure we can do that. Thank you. And that's telling me time police, but indeed good. We've covered governance, I think, and I think there's a consensus there that there should be more young people there, despite the fact that there are some barriers, as the delegate from Nigeria said, that, you know, the cost of entering is too high. So, given what the young lady just said there, let's come to you, Amin. Let's move to job creation, which is kind of broadly speaking also connected to education. Because when it comes to job creation, you can go either two ways. You can go through employment or entrepreneurship, you know. And you're doing something very interesting because certainly the African Development Bank has said that by 2030, agriculture is going to be the big business, and that's where the billionaires are going to appear, that it will be a $1 trillion industry. And you're working in a very interesting initiative, a startup, which is creating work and showing that young people can be attracted by the agriculture sector. So just tell us how you think that relates to job creation.
Sure, thank you for the question. So, I mean, in a nutshell, we're focusing a lot on avoiding climate change. I doubt that at this stage, looking at the trends of improvement on each of the SDGs, we're going to make it. I'm not pessimistic at all, and you'll see throughout my speech. We should focus right now as well a lot on climate resilience. It means how are we going to survive with our current settings in various industries to a climate that will change. So indeed, one of the initiatives that I'm working on currently is building climate resilience for agriculture. And some of you might have heard about controlled environment agriculture. It is basically about producing food with very limited resources. So what we do today in Jodor, which is a startup I've co-founded with a dear friend of mine, is about democratizing a technology called hydroponics and making it affordable and available for African farmers, and making that system open source, duplicable, so that we can go and reach as much farmers in Africa as possible so that they can have stable revenue, not completely depend on rain, and being able to grow their food and be more dependent. Because we talked, your first word was creating jobs. With this kind of climate issues we're facing, it's not only to be about creating, but it's also about saving some. Today, just in Morocco, 65% of the workforce work in agriculture. What will happen if all rain stops? If we do not solve this water scarcity issue, how are we going to save 65% of the jobs in Morocco? And I can easily extrapolate that to many countries. And I'll stop there, not to be too long.
No, sorry. Well, we will come to climate shortly, but certainly, as you say, agriculture is a big employer in large parts of Africa and also parts of Latin America, Brazil, for instance. And, you know, it's just relate that to your experiences, Pauline, in terms of job creation.
Yeah, as you know, he was saying, I was like, I have the burning desire to share. So as you look across the panel, we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries represented here, right? So that's number one. Number two, what I hear as my colleague here is speaking, and that's something that relates to what we were talking about before when it comes to youth and representation and inviting, youth to have a seat at the table, is the issue is that, I guess that, the high-level dialogue doesn't really understand is that youth leads out of need, okay? So across the 5 countries here represented, in Latin America, and Brazil being the largest country in the world with the percentage of African descendants, right? The issues are very similar. And I'm here to, again, repeat this. Youth leads because of need. Some of us across these countries, we don't do X project or Y project because we're passionate, that too, but initially it's because we're from communities that are in dire need of support, okay, and there's nobody, and there's, no leader, and oftentimes it feels like we're not even part of the state. We feel the absence of the state. So we just have to grab it in our own hands and do it. And that definitely poses some level of stress and tension between, youth and governance and all those issues. And you'll see that all the issues we're going to be talking about, they intersect, okay? So I just wanted to highlight that. That's number one. And number two, what does that do, right? Youth looking to the side and looking to the other side and being like, okay, nobody's doing anything for me. I don't see the state. I don't see the government. Let us just go ahead and create jobs for ourselves, essentially, right, across different initiatives. And that looks different across each country, obviously. But what we do have in common is we have to rise to the occasion very often. That's number one, exhaustive. And number two, we need to just keep creating those jobs and just keep creating our path. And oftentimes it's just really frustrating when, outside organizations and other folks kind of come back into the communities and kind of tell us what to do. And we are doing it because we need to put bread on the table. And oftentimes, I guarantee you that youth is really the head of the household by the age of, 18. Much younger sometimes, if you're coming from the global south and you're coming from communities such as the one that I come from, a favela or a slum in Brazil, for example. So we are in dire need of, job creations and of initiatives that collaborate with youth because nobody knows our communities better than us.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
Who wants to pick up on? Yeah, Nusrat.
Can I pick up on that? I agree with you. I think, and I would bring this. I would connect what you said to the panels on multilateralism. I think we can, on day 2, the panel, I think it was the panel 3rd or 4th, the speakers suggested that there should be a restructuring redesign of multilateralism. I think we can move away from multilateralism to multi-stakeholderism, where multi-stakeholders represent the local populations, local communities, academia, activists, other civil society organizations. Of course, governments are there, international bodies include, and tech companies as well. So we work together in a multi-stakeholder environment.
So on job creation, I mean, we've heard about, Pauline saying that the youth are seizing the initiative and having to create the jobs through entrepreneurship for themselves. But what do you want from governments? What should the state provide in terms of perhaps education and making sure that you have the right education to perform the skills, to have the skills to perform the jobs that the economies need in your countries, in your regions? What do you want? How responsive do you want government to be? In what way to help create jobs? Levar.
Yeah, I would say that when you look at different demographics across the US or internationally, it's not all created equal. And we live in a society where if you have the means, you can afford better quality education and resources and opportunities. And if you don't, you just have to kind of fend for what's left. And I think therein lies an issue, because there is a lot of talent across the world and in different countries that if there was just opportunity and resources and mentorship and guidance to help young people maximize their potential and to really develop to their fullest capacity, then we can really start addressing these more complex issues. But if we are starting out at a disadvantage and being expected to overcome hurdles that have systemic roots, who are we kidding?
What are those systemic roots you're talking about?
Systemic roots
that lead to those inequities?
Well, I can speak from the US framework, but in terms of systemic racism and recognizing that if you come from a black or brown community or an indigenous community, that you have access to different resources, or the access to information is not the same. So now when you are navigating a space or spaces that weren't necessarily created for you to be a part of, it becomes difficult to succeed.
So you think that there are communities, disadvantaged communities, not getting the quality education they have, which inevitably means they're disadvantaged when it comes to getting good, decent jobs.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, the core lies at the state level to provide good education in an equitable manner. So you think that good job creation starts way back there. Cecilia, yeah?
Yes, I mean, I'm really not an expert on education, but yesterday night, again, amazing panel, we discussed the fact that education is both a blessing and a curse. And I thought it was really interesting because we mentioned the fact that that girls are being graded poorly compared to boys. And I mean, this is just one example. But what if we started grading, what if professors started grading the children without knowing the gender? So this kind of simple policies, if we take these things that we know now, like all the work that have been done by social scientists, and if we factored it in our education policies, wouldn't it be already something that would actually make a change? Also, yesterday night, we discussed the fact that somebody truly believes that this person has been selected for a job because the camera was off and the evaluator could not see the color of the skin. This is also something really concrete that can change lives. So, and we do not think, I mean, at least so far we haven't been thinking of these simple things that can actually change things. So, and again, I'm not an expert in education, but if I can think of these things, I'm sure that the expert can use all these really tangible elements to change the policies.
So just let me go back now to the emerging leaders. Yeah, a voice there on this issue of job creation and education. Do introduce yourself.
I'm Salim Demejan. I'm a Moroccan economist based in Washington, D.C. Actually, before I comment, I would like just to thank, on behalf of the ADEL community, the organizers, the Policy Center, for doing this huge job, for bringing us here. Honestly, we did learn a lot. We met with different people from different backgrounds, and we did listen to people, and we do learn a lot from the older generation, and we have something to say. My comment is actually, and because of the session is the future we want, I think what we want is a future in which people from different backgrounds, and especially kids, get the same equality of chance, actually, the same education, the same quality, because the world we are heading to is that the rich people are finding the solution for themselves, creating private schools and private health sector, and the people are not even meeting at school. And it was not the case 20 years ago. When I started, I was in school, we had no private primary school in my city. Now everybody rich are in the private, the poor are and we are not getting the same chances. And therefore, the future we are building, it's a two-side future. What I want for the future is that we close this gap and we do the redistribution from the beginning, and we could accept it at the end in that case. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, young lady here. Anybody that side? No.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, my name is Fatima. I am based in Geneva, originally from Libya. I wanted to give an example from my home country, which had about a 41% unemployment rate at the time of the uprisings in 2011. I'm sure you all know that in the past decade, my country has been in absolute chaos, and at the same time, for a young person in that country, they would be paid 3 times as much to join a militia and fight fellow countrymen, usually, than to work in a day labor job. So to answer your original question, Zainab, on job growth and job creation, what are we supposed to do when the government is a failed government? I was rather inspired this week when we visited UM6P, and we visited a coding school that was in such sponsored by OCP Group, that was run in such a decentralized way to allow for peer learning, and obviously enabling technology. And a lot of these kids who could start at the age of 18 were able to get 4 or 5 job offers within 2 years of doing the program. So we asked the organizers, how do you scale this kind of model in other countries that need it? And they said that you need the sponsorship and the support of the private sector. And that's something that perhaps should be raised more in these discussions, is what is the role of business in addressing these societal issues when the government isn't always capable of doing so or doesn't have the necessary resources?
Very good point. I'd like you to think of that question, panel, and respond to the delegate from Libya, Switzerland. Yes? And there's one behind there, yes.
I'm Martina from Italy. Actually, about this point, we were talking about education, and there is a lot of discussion about education, and actually, we already know what is needed in education. We know what are the skills of the future. There was a publication from the WEF in 2016 that was pointing out very well what are the skills, and there's a lot of best practices learned across the globe, and the university we visit, the Polytechnic University, is a clear example that if you have the correct leadership, you can implement this kind of model across, like, at least a university. The problem is scaling it up at the national level, and one key actor is teachers, and there's not enough focus on updating the skills of the teachers so that they can implement then the necessary change in the schools. And the other point is entrepreneurship. What is missing also in schools today is entrepreneurial classes, so that students know that entrepreneurship is an option. In my country, Italy, a lot of students go out from school thinking they will become employees. They have no interest, especially in the South, to become entrepreneurs. And also there is no incubators, accelerators, or other programs that can help them also to go through all the bureaucracy needed to start a business. So another thing to focus on, I think, is removing the obstacles for youth to start entrepreneurial activities.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I mean, that's why your point about teachers being able to teach, which is why I said quality education, not just education, which factors in the fact that teachers have to be up to the job. Yes, young man.
Hi, José Reis. I'm originally from Portugal. I work at the Greater London Authority. Just following the cue from Martina and on the job creation point. So education is the basis, but I think from the London perspective, the European perspective, we are on the brink of recession, high inflation, slow growth for a long period of time, and particularly stagnation of wages. So, creating jobs and supporting job creation in areas where you can find common ground. You've heard in this conference a lot of discussion about cooperation between Europe or Southern Europe and Africa and America, for example, on clean energy and energy production. We visited in the Mohammed VI Polytechnic. They're doing amazing research on clean energy. So there's a lot of elements where you can this type of where you can find common ground to create jobs that not only contribute to kind of carbon reduction, but also can give create skilled positions, can be inclusive and good work with decent salaries and non-precarious conditions. And another quick observation is that linking to the previous kind of governance question is that this conference was incredibly interesting on how we were able to see different perspectives from all areas of the world and how we could do quite interesting diagnoses. But we almost always, and forgive me for this challenge, felt a bit short of the solutions or of kind of the policy solutions. And sometimes, even when the hard questions were asked towards the end of the panels, almost never there was time, or the panelists, understandably, did not have enough time to kind of go to the solutions and the implementation. And I do think there was a positive collaboration between these questions and how young the person who asked them. So it is part of the including young leaders. And not that we are going to find solutions in everything, but you can start discussing how to start the conversation on implementation.
Yeah, and we talked about the example of best practice and so on. So thank you for making the point that, all this discussion comes against a very difficult economic background globally, where you've got all sorts of economic indicators going down, which presents, a huge challenge for governments everywhere. But just on the point from the emerging leader from Libya / Switzerland, about the role of the private sector, because you do see the private sector, countries like Liberia, for instance, in Africa, where they've basically hoovered up all the primary and secondary education provision, something which is normally seen as the domain, of the state. Is there a role for that? And just generally, what do you think as emerging leaders of the private sector in providing solutions? 3 of you put up your hands. Go on. Pauline?
Okay. I guess the participation of the private sector brings the potential for collaboration, which brings resources, which is what we need. Now, just broadly, resources is not enough, because I feel like even when you have a collaboration between the private sector and the government, you need to find out what are those resources that you need. And how do you find out what youth needs? You ask. It's not that difficult. You have to ask. And in asking, you listen. And I think that partnership, the private sector, whoever is willing to help and collaborate and help us build a better future, or a future at all, because without youth, there's no future, right? Speaking very practically, you need that, because you need people-centered policy to generate people-centered learning, because we need a people-centered society. Otherwise, there's absolutely no future. So that's kind of how I see it, right? Even if the private sector is coming in, the OCP example was beautiful, right? It was a very people-centered school, people-centered, that was amazing, but don't come in with assumptions. Come in assuming that you'll have to ask to understand and engage to then build together. That's what I have to say.
All right, you want to build on that. It would be nice if you could tell everybody what different concerns youth have from just any generation in society. I mean, essentially, don't youth want the same things that the older generation want? Health, good jobs, good, decent jobs.
Equity is certainly a concern, but for example, what youth wants in Brazil may not be the same in India, in the US,
Is that
in
so?
Italy,
Is that
in
so?
Morocco. So that's why, we ask that folks humble down and ask. And we call that dialogue. And that's
All
the
right.
reason why we're here.
Is that so? Yeah? Navar?
Yeah, I think we make so many assumptions as to what we all want, and until we can stop speaking at one another and start to listen, we can listen and understand the needs. Because at the cry out of what we're speaking, the subtle intonations and the subtlety of it all is we're saying, listen, we need resources, but we also need to be understood. We also need to feel heard. We also need to feel as if our issues aren't, oh, you're a young person, these are young people issues, but these are issues that affect the political sector, the social sector, the economic sector. They have intersection within different arenas. So once we are able to be heard in that capacity to feel like, okay, as a leader or as a leader in general, these issues affect everyone. It just doesn't affect young people.
On the private sector issue, and you want to answer that one? Do you want to answer that one as well? Okay.
I go on that, please. I want to actually bring a good example on the table about how the private sector can make things work fast and with a certain level of agility. So I'll take the example of a financing program that happened in Morocco called Forza. This is one of the first initiatives where we would allow easily access to small entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, the access to microfinancing and launch their project. I was, in the beginning, honestly, very skeptical, like how fast can that work? Can that really work? And actually it worked really well, in my perspective, because private sector and public sector worked together, and the process, it was really impressive. A lot of people were able to launch their businesses, create 2, 3, 4 jobs, and thousands of projects have been financed, and with very, very, very little amounts, and that is enough. So basically what I want to say is that we're not here to tell you what we want. We know what we want, we know how to build it, but we need empowerment. We need to go faster with the funds that most of you do control. So while people are talking about policies and thinking about what's going to happen, a lot of people are still choosing today if they're going to eat bread or vegetables this week. So we need to go faster, okay? We need to decrease the time where we decide that the fund is going to go to a certain cause, and by the time the actual field reach that area, the fund reach that area. So we need to go faster. We need to build lean processes into solving key issues. Being from the industrial mindset, everything is about lean, so let's make quick activities, and we truly believe that youth can help into this transition.
So in concrete terms, you want a youthful entrepreneur to be able to
in
get access to finance from local banks or grants from governments?
It's PPP, so public and private partnerships, and hence that in each government body, go faster and listen to the solutions are on the field, they're not on the office. They're on the field, find them, finance them quick, help them scale, identify the one that can be duplicated, and let's go fast.
How did you get the finance for your initiative? Did you go and knock on the door of a bank, and did
No,
they give you the money easily?
No, not at all. It was a beautifully nice digitalized process where we do apply, we follow such a number of criteria, we get financing, we explain the business modeling, and we empower the people into being an entrepreneur and learn and share and duplicate the models. It's all going to be about identifying the innovation that can scale fast and that can solve the key problems.
Right, okay. Nusrat.
Yeah, I think private sector is very important. And I would talk about India, because India has so much technological potential. And I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, he asked me you have so many engineers, your engineers can go to Europe, to America, to other countries, you have so many skills. Why doesn't that happen? And it really made me think. And one of the answers to that is that there is a gap. There's a gap when it comes to talking between the government and the private sector. So when students graduate from high school, they don't necessarily know what skills are required in the sector they are going to, because there's a gap, there's a communication gap. So that needs to be addressed. And I will bring this back to the to multi-stakeholderism here, which needs to be worked on.
Okay, I said at the outset, so we said governance, job creation, stroke education, and climate change. So, climate change. That's one of the top priorities for young people, indeed for a lot of people in the world. So, how important is it to you guys and ladies, and why? Who wants to kick off on that? Cecilia, do you want to kick off on climate change?
Of course, because I'm an expert in climate change.
No. Just, you know, do you lie awake at night thinking about it, about
as a human
greenhouse gas
being,
emissions?
of course I think about it, but everybody should not be sleeping because of it. So I, again, can speak from on my perspective. But, okay, maybe something that I can actually say about climate change is related to the EU and the fact that the EU, but also the US, are adopting now structural laws that are trying to fight climate change. And I think of the EU Green Deal. I can mention also the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And I want to speak about this because those are fundamental regulations that will have a major impact, but they have they are creating really concrete problems between, like, transatlantic issues, I would say.
That's because the Inflation Reduction Act has a provision of $400 billion, which the US is using for clean technologies, which the European Union has said disadvantages.
Exactly. And the EU is actually doing the same thing with the Green Deal. Some of the rules that are part of the package they do have a direct impact on Morocco economy, but also on a more global scale. So when we're doing this, when we're working on how to fight climate change, we should never lose. We should always keep in mind that we need to discuss this together and not just take unilateral decisions.
So what, you think the global north is dominating the debate for the global south, or what's your
What I wanted
view?
to say is that the EU and the UN now, they have been pioneering on adopting major regulations that are impacting other countries. So this is what I want to say. It's just that we are taking decisions without looking at the possible implications of them.
You're nodding, Pauline. I mean,
I'm nodding because this right here is leading to this really big field called environmental justice, which historically is also, connected to, white folks and white decision makers. We're mostly located in the north. Now, if you know me, I told you I'm from Brazil, I told you I'm from a favela, and I'm going to tell you now that we must not discount, what community organizing is doing for the climate. Okay? Because when we think about the climate, it's obviously connected to environment, and when I say environmental justice is, we really need to shift our thinking and the ways in which we think those discussions are being led. Because yes, we have, the folks who went to COP27, the folks who protested, demanded a loss and damage fund. Yeah, we have those folks, but we also have the Black women in the global south who are organizing, making sure that folks have, clean water, taking care of folks, despite the climate, and taking care of folks, despite all the consequences that come from this climate change, which will affect, folks in the global south way more. That is exactly why my colleague is saying that, there is a dominant narrative and we need to challenge it. That's how I see it.
All right.
Thank you.
Nusrat and then Laval.
Climate change is very important, and climate change, I think, is very important. It's not just about climate. Climate crisis leads to a lot of other crises as well. For example, refugee crisis, displacement, protests, food insecurity, which leads to so many human rights violations. So climate is really important. It feeds into so many other problems that we have been talking about in the last 3 days.
Okay. Laval?
Yeah, I think we do the topic of climate change no justice when we fail to recognize the disproportionate impact it has on populations. approximately 21 million people live within 3 miles of a hazardous waste site in the United States. Within that demographic, you have low-income, minority, linguistically isolated individuals, as well as marginalized and indigenous people. So when you look at that disproportionate exposure to hazards, you have higher rates of cancer in certain communities over others. So when we just speak about climate in this big term, sometimes we lose those marginalized groups of people who are really being affected on the ground, who don't have access to clean water, who are still struggling to have their voices heard when it comes to policy making and decision making, because the media tends to dominate certain issues and neglect those who are being affected on the ground. So for me, I think how we speak about issues and the language we use and how inclusive we are to those who are disproportionately impacted by the issues in environment, climate, we have to start with that before we can say we can effectively address climate, because we can talk about it on this stage, but people are being affected daily. I was reading earlier today about Pakistan, only contributing 2% to carbon dioxide, but then they're largely recipients of that. Or even in Nigeria, where you look at flooding that's taking place right now, there's disproportionate impacts, and until we can look at that, we continue to fool ourselves in this larger conversation.
Yeah. So, I mean, can we look at solutions briefly? Because, I mean, you've all been very good at identifying, what the issues are and so on. I mean, I think you've given some suggestions as to what we can do. So, I mean, specifically on climate, do you, young people, emerging leaders, bring anything different to the table because you are going to live much longer than the older generation with the consequences of climate change? I mean, is there more anger, more fire in your bellies? Is there something that should be done that's not being done? Is there a dissonance between how the Atlantic region, the parts of the global south, this region, see it differently from the global north? I just want to get an idea whether you bring this emerging leaders' perspective with concrete ideas as to what to do. Sorry, Lavar, did you want to finish off your thought, and then Amin, is it?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think Pauline said something really important earlier in terms of entrepreneurs coming out of communities that have great needs. And that's really important because that leads to perspective and understanding, and not just trying to create solutions out of thin air, but it's coming from a place of recognizing the needs, recognizing the lacks in terms of how we can bridge those needs with the resources in the environment. So.
But I mean, you're doing something, broadly speaking, kind of climate smart agriculture, trying to use, fertilizers that don't have a pernicious impact on the global warming and so on and so forth. So, I mean, do you feel that the greater connection that young people have to technology, the fact, as I said, that you are closer to the impact of global warming because you and your children and grandchildren are going to be living with those consequences, the older generation having been so dirty, that you do bring something different to the table?
I think where youth do act pretty fast is that they understand really on the field how things goes and how, because they do, I'd say youth and also unprivileged communities, they do feel the impact very quick. So they're quickly able to adapt, for example, their way of consumption. I don't want to consume that. This consumes too much water. I don't want to travel there because that's too far. I don't want to buy this because what I have is good enough. Already, the demand creates the offer. It have never been the other way around. So youth are pretty well adaptive and agile into building the future demand. So all of us have the responsibility to consume more responsibly if you want to bring a change. That's on the first side. I'd like also to spend some time on a core suggestion. Today we're talking about global cooperation and spending really a lot of time that it does make sense to bring awareness. But what about clusters on very specific topics that needs to be solved in just between a few regions and a few countries? We cannot gather internationally and speak about water. It does not make sense. Not everyone have the same issue around water. Rather, let's gather as a very few basically the minimum people around the table to solve the water crisis on a specific region, and we would all be incentive to innovate, to fund on a very localized issue. So basically, we need to somehow nationalize how do we see our roadmap to climate risk and how do we mitigate that. Let's nationalize our impact, fund specific initiatives, and find solutions together. And a cluster mean always, and it should not be forgotten, entrepreneurs, capital, academics, government bodies, and private corporate sector. Once you bring this five, you're able to answer very fast to a problematic, fix it, and move to the next. So this is one of the solutions, clearly. Build clusters on specific areas to, and for example, water and other can be done, obviously.
All right, good. So we're almost out of time. Just want to ask you all just your final thoughts, incorporating anything that you feel that you haven't really raised, and perhaps you could also just, you know, come up with one kind of really innovative, visionary kind of solution or statement about all the discussion that we've been having today. Nusrat, you start, and I'll just go along this way, just about a minute each.
One of the things that I would suggest as a visionary thing would be to include one alumni young leader into the panel discussions every Atlantic dialogues, so that there is an intergenerational dialogue even within the panel and across the room as well.
All right, okay. Lavar, I mean, it needn't be within the confines of this conference. The whole globe is there for you to play with. Go on,
sorry, I'll play with what you said.
Yeah.
I think we have been talking about a lot of macro things here. I want to go to really, really micro level, which is the philosophy of how, the psychology of how we address the bias that we almost all of us have. In fact, we also have it when it comes to talking in public, because we also sometimes think that as you know, we're young, so let's give the mic to an older person first because they might have more things to say because of experience. No, we are equal, and so we need to first think we are equal, and then that bias, and address that bias. So my one word, self-reflection.
All right, good. Well, I mean, I've been giving you the floor all afternoon, so I hope that I've been contributing to that. Good. Lavar, thank you.
Thank you. I would say that everyone in this room and who's watching all have a role to play. We can no longer take the approach of waiting for a superhero to come and address these issues, but we have to put the capes on ourselves and have an active role and responsibility to addressing the complexities that we see in society. So that's the first thing. As well as, particularly within the context of the conference, calling out systemic inequities early on. I think it's hard to have conversations about complex issues without recognizing that it's not an equal footing. And until we can acknowledge that big elephant in the room, then we're able to have a transparent, honest, open dialogue and discourse about the pros, the cons, the challenges, and how we can, as emerging leaders and as leaders of the previous generation, can work collaboratively together to make inclusive, effective policies.
Okay, we've not had much intergenerational dialogue, I have to admit, except me representing the older generation on this panel, but since you're all so keen to have your space, I thought I'd just stick with the emerging leaders in the audience and you guys. Cecilia?
Yes, I would like to give an example of why diversity and inclusivity are important in decision making. And I will take an example from this science, especially primatology. There is a scientist called Jane Goodall that some of us might know. She's pretty famous. And she was the first one to realize that apes use instruments to eat. And what was revolutionary at the time was that nobody ever could conceive the fact that animals could do that, and that was for like the entire scientific community the proof that animals were different compared to humans. So this was revolutionary in the science field, and she was not even a scientist itself when she made this discovery. She was just a random woman sent by a proper scientist that was staying in the UK, and she was sent in the field.
And the point is?
And the point is, we also need to apply this idea to policymaking.
All right.
This is why it's so important.
Okay, good, thank you. Very quickly, Amin and then Pauline.
Sure. On my side, I'd like to end on a bit on a philosophical note. I'll quickly report a dialogue between two leaders of our civilizations. So one was saying to the other, the community have chosen you to lead. And the other one responds, but I do not want power. And the first one replies, if the community knew or thought that you wanted the power, we would not have given it to you. So I'll let you all interpret that and self-reflect on our position as leader. Are we doing the right thing for everyone?
Thank you. Pauline?
Well, my message is very simple and it stays consistent. People-centered policy for people-centered learning and education, because we need a people-centered future. That's it.
All right, good. Well, we've had philosophy, economics, climate, and all the rest of it, and entrepreneurship. I think it's been great listening to the young, emerging leaders in this session, and I think they've all been terrific. Thank you all very much, and thank you. Please. Please stay. Thank you. Please stay where you are, because we have our final thank you. We have our final address to wrap the conference. Quick photograph. Okay, good. I like hanging out with the young crowd. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The closing remarks will now begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage for the closing remarks the Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South, Karim Leinawi.
So how was it? How was it? Well, thank you, actually, to all of you, and I think you should applaud yourself. You've been fantastic, generous, engaged, motivated. We're very proud of being your friends, your partner. Many thanks. I would like also to thank the staff of the Policy Center for the New South and the senior fellows, the researchers, and particularly also Lilia, who has been the head coordinator. As you've seen, it takes our partners as well, who have been doing the production, the hotel, all of you, many thanks. We had serious discussions. It was not only about fun. You know, we all sort of participate to many events of this nature, but I think there's something special. We talked about atmosphere, feeling, vibes. When we opened this conference, I hope you were able to feel it. I sensed it through the serious and engaged discussions, sometimes almost confrontational from time to time. But this vibe also flowed through the music. You had two intercessions of music. This is Moroccan trance music. It lasted for 10 minutes, but to reach a point where you're in the trance, it can last for hours. But you had a flavor of it. So thank you for your ideas, generosity in sharing, accepting to play the game. I think it was very many open discussions and not, you know, langue de bois, as we say in French, you know, just official talk. I think you were great. I hope you also enjoyed the breakout dinners where you had serious expert discussion, more focused among yourself. I think it was an interesting experience hearing the feedback I got. To be very brief, I take also that this is happening in a context, not in a vacuum, so lots of ambiguity, complexity, crisis, challenges, you know, transition, you know, after sort of a stable world in a way until the 1980s. Maybe we're seeing something emerging now, 30 years after, with difficulties, fragmentation, tension. So, and I think this is, as it is more complex, we need to intensify our discussion. And method is important. Methods and values are important. And I think we share values. And in terms of method, we can improve. This is one method. There are other methods that we are investigating at the Policy Center, such as policy labs, putting people in a room. I mean, you've been also, I'm sure, yourself exposed to these kind of methods. So, but I think we should continue. I don't think we're lacking ideas, but the question is really getting ourselves out of our positions, our countries in a way, elevating a little bit ourselves. And again, I think this notion, this conception of the Atlantic we're trying to sort of foster, build together is promising. It will take time, but I think it's promising, and you can count on us to continue to invest with energy. Two small upcoming, I would say, events or activities on our side. We have a group with our friends at GMF. Where is Jan Lesser? I hope he's here. He's always in the first row. So we're together with other colleagues and friends from Portugal in particular. We are having a group that it's called the Atlantic Strategy Group, and inshallah it will take place in Morocco, in Rabat, in the first or second semester of the upcoming year. Something to look forward. If you have an interest, you want to be involved, just let us know. There's also an interesting book coming. Where is Len? Stand up, Len. Yeah, stand up. That's Len. So, yes, she has a great book. She's done at the Policy Center, which is an interesting book, Aftermath of War in Europe, the West versus the Global South. So this is something we will promote very soon, very interesting piece where, again, the same spirit, we hear, we listen, we give the opportunity to all kind of researchers from the Atlantic at large to contribute. I would like to offer you to propose something that when you fly back, maybe now, between now and the gala dinner, you have fresher idea, I'm not sure after, or tomorrow. If you can share with us one idea via email, you know, short, but just one idea about methods, about, you know, things to do, whatever you think is useful, please do that for us. We're asking for one idea, one thought, whatever, recommendation, whatever you may feel in terms of that. So again, thanks to you all. I wish you a great 2023 year, if we don't see you before. Safe travel back. Enjoy your vacations, and inshallah, we'll continue, and we hope to see you very soon, at the latest next year, and inshallah before, in all kinds of activities we may have again. So thank you very much. I think it's finished. It's finished. You're free.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we conclude the final plenary of the Atlantic Dialogues. We are holding our annual concluding gala dinner at Palais El Badieh. Buses will be heading from your hotel to the venue at 7:30 sharp. We thank you for joining us at the 11th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues and hope to see you next year.